Welcome back, students. So we'll continue with the same chapter, human reproduction, after this break. Okay, fine. Shall we start? All right. Let us begin. Before we'll start, let us have the quick recap of all the things that we discussed in the first part, the human reproduction. We began with the lifespan, the reproduction. Okay, and then we discussed about the male reproductive system. The male reproductive system, we discussed about the testes, the secondary sex organs, and we discussed about the duct system in males. And come to the female also, the female reproductive system, the primary sex organ, the ovary that we discussed, the external, the internal structure, and how actually the follicle formation takes place that we discussed, and then the duct system, and then the duct system and the secondary sexual structures that we discussed as for the female reproductive system is concerned. Now, in continuing with that, we're done with the external genitalia. All right. Now we'll start with the continuation of the female. Fine. We'll start with this. We try to complete with this. I mean, this is next 1.5 hour session. This 1.5 hour session, we'll try to complete this particular chapter, the human reproduction. We'll try to complete. And after that, we'll have a break, and then we'll start with a new chapter, that is genetics, molecular basis of inheritance. Okay, molecular basis of inheritance that we can start actually. Okay, that will do it. Okay, now we'll start with the mammary gland. The previous part we discussed about the female external genitalia, that we discussed already. Fine. Now coming to the mammary gland. The skin over the center of the elevation has a dark pigmented circular areola, right? Have a circular areola. Yes, a circular areola, and a nipple is a projection of the areola. So you could see this is actually the pigmented circular areola part that you could see over here. This is actually talking about the areola over here, and the projection, and the nipple is actually the projection that you could see. Fine. Okay, and next following with that areola, we have a nipple over here. So, and then the mass of the glandular tissue. When you talk about the mammary glands, what is actually the mammary gland? The mammary gland is the mass of the glandular tissues with 15 to 20 mammary lobes which present inside. So 50 to 20 mammary lobes which present inside, that which radiates outward the nipple parts. And this contains the milk producing glands actually. So this milk producing glands which is present over here, and this is responsible for lactation, and this we also call it as a lactiferous glands. This glands we call it as lactiferous glands, and this under the influence of the hormone. Can you name the hormone which is responsible for the stimulation of these glands? What is the name of the hormone which secretes actually by the pituitary gland? Actually, what is the name of the hormone? There's one specific hormone which stimulates this actually the lactiferous glands to secrete the milk, so that like mom, she can feed the newborn, right? So this lactiferous, what is the name of the hormone, right? It undergoes atrophy after the menopause. But what happens to the mammary glands? This undergoes like atrophy or degeneration, and then it leads after the menopause, this system is not be functioning over here. Okay, exactly. This the name of the hormone is PR, that is prolactin. Prolactin is the name of the hormone which is responsible for the lactiferous gland secretions, or the secretion of the milk. Last part also we're going to discuss about the milk which is getting out of the first milk. What is the name of the first milk which comes out of the mother's breast after the delivery, after the childbirth? What is the name of the first milk? Even the gynecologist suggest mom supposed to feed the baby, the newborn, for the first period of 6 months. What is the first milk which comes out of the mother's breast? So this of the a medical significance also. The gynecologist obstetrics they recommend them to produce and to feed the baby right for the 6 months. The first milk which comes out is actually, we call it as a colostrum. We call it as a colostrum. This colostrum which supplies all the necessary nutrients for the developing neonate, the newborn. The newborns are called as neonate, right? This provides necessary nutrients for the neonate. Neonate means, what does it mean? The meaning of neonate? Neonate means newborn. Here, the neonate, where the neonate will be getting all the essential immunity by means of the immunoglobulin. What one particular immunoglobulin which is abundantly present in this secretion, this colostrum? What is actually the name of the antibody or the immunoglobulin? Can you tell me what is the immunoglobulin which seems to be abundant in this secretion in the mother's milk or the colostrum, which provides like the immunity, which confers the immunity for the first 6 months of the time where the fetus, the neonate, the newborn, which will be getting like the immunity from the mother. Complete immunity to fight against the pathogens, disease. முதல் 6 மாசம் காலத்துக்கு குழந்தைங்களுக்கு வந்து நோய் எதிர்ப்பு சக்தி இருக்காது. 6 மாசத்துக்கு அப்புறம் தான் புதுசா பிறந்த குழந்தைங்களுக்கு வந்து நோய் எதிர்ப்பு சக்தி வரும். அதனால அம்மா வந்து தாய் வந்து செய்க்கு என்ன பண்ணணும்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா முதல் 6 மாதங்கள் வந்து குழந்தைக்கு வந்து பால் கொடுக்கணும்ன்றது கட்டாயம் இல்லையா? ஏன் கேட்டீங்கன்னா this gives actually immunity by means of the antibody which present in the colostrum. The name of the immunoglobulin is IgA. So the other name of IgA, this is secretory immunoglobulin. This you could see abundant in most of the body secretions. No wonder even in the colostrum you could see this particular immunoglobulin. If this question comes, what is the name of the immunoglobulin or antibody which present in the colostrum? That is actually in the milk, mother's milk, that is immunoglobulin A. What is the main function? This confers immunity for the thing actually. Okay, fine. This is about the mammary glands, and here you could see the pectoris major muscle. Here the muscles which connects to the breast, this part is the pectoris major muscles, and pectoris fat pad. Here you could see the fat deposits over the yellow color part that you could see, right? These are the fatty tissues that you could see all over here, and it's connected by means of the suspensory ligaments. The suspensory ligaments, because the reflection, how actually the impulses which will be generated when the neonate, the child sucks actually the mother's nipples, the reflex, the impulses which pass inside, this will activate the pituitary gland, and through the hypothalamus, like by pituitary gland, again the prolactin hormone which will be secreted, and this again activates the lactiferous glands. Then the milk will be ejected out of it, and through the nipple, the neonate and the child, the baby can get fulfilled. Okay, so this is how the mammary gland works. Next, come to the gametogenesis. So we're done with the female reproductive system. We'll start with the gametogenesis. You know the gametogenesis? Gametogenesis is the process of gamete formation in sexually reproducing animals. The formation of male gametes in the testis is called spermatogenesis. As we know, like gametogenesis, in males we call it as spermatogenesis. In females, what is the name of the process in females, the gametogenesis, that we call it as? Male, we call it as spermatogenesis. This is in case of male. First, we'll discuss about male, we call it as spermatogenesis. Then we'll discuss about the female. In females, we call it as oogenesis. Oogenesis, where like ova, the egg is getting produced out of the ovary. That we call it as oogenesis. In male, we call it as spermatogenesis. First, we'll begin with the spermatogenesis. Now, already comparative like spermatogenesis and oogenesis oda comparison நீங்க பாத்தீங்கன்னா spermatogenesis process வந்து ரொம்ப சிம்பிளா முடியும். Two meiotic divisions, meiosis 1, meiosis 2, complete சீக்கிரத்துல last stage is spermiation that we're going to discuss now. But oogenesis is not actually so simple. First part கேட்காதவங்களுக்கு இது சொல்றேன். Oogenesis is a complex process where we're going to discuss the comparison between the spermatogenesis and oogenesis. Why we call oogenesis is a complex process. It's not so simple like that of the male, that is in spermatogenesis mari. Oogenesis is a simple process இல்லன்றதுக்கு justification வந்து இந்த குன்னொரு சில few slides நம்ம பார்க்க போறோம். Okay, so the cells of the germinal epithelium of the seminiferous tubules of the testis which enter the process of spermatogenesis are called the primary germ cells. There are special types of cells, we call it as primary germ cells or primordial germ cells, we call it as, and these germ cells are responsible for performing this process called as spermatogenesis. Spermatogenesis is the last stage of the parent. What is the last stage of spermatogenesis? The last stage, the matured sperm, the motile sperms வெளியில produce ஆகும் இல்லையா? What is the name of that particular process? The last stage of the spermatogenesis. We use a particular stage, the name. What is the name? That we call it as the last stage of the spermatogenesis, where the motile sperms which will get produced out of the spermatozoa. Spermiation, exactly. The spermiation, that we call it as the spermiation is the last stage of the spermatogenesis. Together we call it as spermatogenesis. So spermiogenesis as well as the first initial process also we're going to discuss together. Spermiogenesis is நீங்க நினைச்சுக்க கூடாது spermiogenesis ஒரு தனி process கிடையாது. Spermiogenesis is the last stage of the spermatogenesis. கடைசி stage of the spermatogenesis we call it as spermiogenesis, where the motile spermatozoa is getting produced. இதுதான் நம்ம spermiogenesis or spermiation நம்ம அப்படின்னு சொல்லுவோம். சரிங்களா? It's a part of spermatogenesis. So don't get confused with Spermatogenesis, spermiogenesis, confusion varakudadu. Spermiogenesis or spermiation is the last stage of spermatogenesis for your understanding. Okay. Now we'll start with the phases. Spermatogenesis papom. Here both in spermatogenesis and oogenesis, we have the multiplication, we have the growth phase, and we have a maturation phase. Oogenesis, spermatogenesis ரெண்டுத்துலயுமே இந்த மூணு process stage நடக்கும். என்னென்ன phases பாத்தீங்கன்னா multiplication phase, growth phase, and we have a maturation phase. உங்க டெக்ஸ்ட் புக்ஸ்ல NCERT இல்ல எந்த புக்ல இருந்தாலும் இது கிளியரா அந்த இது கொடுத்திருப்பாங்க, flow chart மாதிரி கொடுத்திருப்பாங்க. So multiplication phaseல என்ன நடக்கும் அப்படின்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, the conversion of the diploid germ cells. So germ cell oda ploid என்ன, it's a 2n. So the conversion of the diploid germ cell which will be converted to spermatogonia. இதுதான் ஃபர்ஸ்ட்ல எங்க நடக்கும்னா multiplication phaseல நடக்கும். Okay. After that you could see the growth phase. Growth phase la primary spermatocyte will be produced. Here the primary spermatocyte is getting produced. Then during maturation, what happens? Like maturation, two meiotic division takes place. Meiotic division is also called as reduction division. So ploidy 2n வந்து என்ன ஆகும் கேட்டா, the 2n is getting converted to haploid என்ன மாறும். So this occurs by means of meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. So two meiotic division, இது ரெண்டுமே common. Spermatogenesisல ரெண்டு meiotic division நடக்கும், oogenesisல ரெண்டு meiotic division நடக்கும். ஆனா எப்பப்ப நடக்க போகுதுன்றது மட்டும் தான், there is a slight difference between spermatogenesis and oogenesis. Spermatogenesis process வந்து எப்போ உங்களுக்கு ஸ்டார்ட் ஆகும்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, puberty, when the boy attains the puberty, that time itself the spermatogenesis starts actually. But oogenesis, I told you, when the oogenesis begins, the oogenesis starts in the fetal stage. ஒரு பெண் குழந்தை கருவுல உருவாகுற அந்த சமயத்திலேயே oogenesis process வந்து ஸ்டார்ட் ஆயிடும். That is what actually which makes the complex. Follicles produce ஆகி ஒரு பாயிண்ட் ஆஃப் டைம்ல ஃப்ரீஸ் ஆகி நிக்கும். ஃப்ரீஸ் ஆனது வந்து என்ன ஆகும், நம்பர்ஸ் இந்த ஃபாலிகல்ஸ் வந்து நம்ம ரெடியூஸ் ஆயிட்டே வரும். ரெடியூஸ் ஆயிட்டே வரும்போது என்ன ஆகும் கேட்டு, ஃப்ரீஸ் ஆனது வந்து puberty stage, when the girl attains the puberty, அப்ப 60th ல இருந்து 80,000 குள்ள தான் அந்த follicles range இருக்கும். அதுல ஒவ்வொரு follicle என்ன ஆகும், ஒவ்வொரு மந்த்ல வந்து என்ன நடக்கும் கேட்டீங்கன்னா oogenesis மூலமா நடந்து. பட் எப்போ oogenesis process கம்ப்ளீட் ஆகும், எப்போ ஒரு sperm வந்து எக்க கொண்டு போய் ஃபியூஸ் ஆகுமோ, ரைட், ஃபியூஸ் ஆகுமோ, that is the point where, like, oogenesis process gets over. So that is why I'm telling, like, oogenesis is a complex process, but spermatogenesis la indha mari complex mechanism kadiyadu, right? Oogenesis ஆரம்பிக்கிறது எங்க, குழந்தை உருவாகுறது fetal stageல ஆரம்பிக்குது, முடியிறது எப்போ, not during menstrual cycle, அப்போ முடியிறது கிடையாது. Oogenesis gets over, completed only when the sperm get fertilized with the immature egg, and the fuse ஆகுற அந்த டைம்ல தான், fertilization டைம்ல தான் oogenesis process which comes to an end actually. So that is why you should remember actually oogenesis is not so simple like that of a spermatogenesis. Okay, fine. So this is how the spermatogenesis, the three phases. Now you see in this part where we discussed about the spermatogenesis, and simultaneously you can compare with the oogenesis also. When compared to the spermatogenesis and oogenesis, we take it in this part where in spermatogenesis, primordial germ cells, I told you, like primordial germ cells in the embryo, first it takes to the mitotic divisions, because the ploidy here is 2n. Okay, mitotic division. Again, this leads to the formation of spermatogonium. This leads to formation of spermatogonium. Again, the ploidy is what? Ploidy is 2n. So mitotic division, and then it leads to, because I discussed already, like there are three phases that we discussed for your reference. What are the three phases? Multiplication phase, growth phase, and then we have a maturation phase. Adha continuation in the diagram நம்ம பார்த்திருக்கோம். So first வந்து we have a multiplication phase, then we have the growth phase, the last phase வந்து we call it as a maturation phase. So this complete flow chart which represents all the three phases. Like, what are the three phases? The three phases are first multiplication, second growth phase, third வந்து maturation phase. The மூணுத்தையும் தான் இந்த flow chartல பார்க்கணும். So first spermatogenesis, when you see, where you see the first, you could see the primary spermatocyte is getting formed, where the ploidy of the primary spermatocyte is a 2n. Again, then it leads to the first meiotic division. This is actually the last phase that maturation phase going to take place. Reduction division. Yeah, the reduction division சொல்றோம் அப்படின்னா, where the ploidy from a 2n is getting transfigured to n, half a mark. So it's getting reduced. So 2n is getting converted or transfigured to n. So in the first meiotic division, again the daughter cells produced by the reduction division by means of second meiotic division. Then again what happens, like this leads to the formation of this 4 haploid, the spermatocytes, which in which spermatozoa is getting produced. But at the last part, what happens, this will be getting converted to sperms actually. The spermatozoa is getting produced at last stage, and this we call it as a spermiation. This is what I told you. This last stage is called as spermiation, or we call it as spermatogenesis. This we call it as a spermatogenesis. So spermatogenesis is the last stage of, what is it called? Sorry, spermiogenesis. This is a spermiogenesis. Spermiogenesis is the last stage of the spermatogenesis. Okay, so where the motile, matured sperms which will be produced, again it gets the nourishment embedded in the Sertoli cells. Idu poi edula poi podinju irukona Sertoli cells kulla podinju irukum. For what? Now the Sertoli cells are the nurse cells which gives the nourishment for the developing this particular sperm, and once it attains a maturity, then it will be coming out of it and it gets stored in the epididymis, where the epididymis is the storehouse of the sperms actually. So this process takes about 64 days. Yeah. Now you take simultaneously in the other side, you could see the oogenesis. Oogenesis, for example, you take in case of female. Male on the romba simple process is this. Spermatogenesis, very simple process. But oogenesis, it's not like that. It's a complex process. The point number one, the complex soldier, the process which already began in the fetal stage la ஆரம்பிக்குது. முடியறது எங்க அப்படினு கேட்டிங்கனா, முடியறது at the time of fertilization in the fallopian tube. அங்கதான் முடியும் process. So fetal stage la ஆரம்பிச்சு fallopian tube at the time of fertilization only the process of oogenesis is getting completed. So it's not so simple as like that of spermatogenesis, but it's a complex process. All right. But if it's in oogenesis, the same way the primordial germ cells, but you should remember where it occurs in embryo. But in boys, where what happens spermiogenesis, once after attains the puberty only this process takes place. But oogenesis எப்ப ஸ்டார்ட் ஆயிருக்கு? The oogenesis குழந்தை பெண் குழந்தை கருவுல அம்மாவோட கருவுல உருவாகுற the embryo stageல ஸ்டார்ட் ஆயிடுச்சு already. So in embryo itself it has begun. Now this leads again the formation of the diploid, that is oogonium. It leads to mitotic division, again leads to the ploidy. So primary oocyte form ஆயிடும். So present at the time of birth, ஒரு பெண் குழந்தை பிறக்கிற டைம்ல it get freezed over it. இந்த இடத்துல freeze ஆகி அப்படியே நிக்கும். So present at the birth, arrested in the stage. இதுல இருந்து questions உங்களுக்கு வரும். எந்த ஸ்டேஜ்ல இது arrest ஆகும் அப்படினு கேட்டிங்கனா, it arrests at the stage in the prophase of meiosis 1. This is very important question. So it arrests in the primary oocyte in oogenesis, get arrested in the prophase of meiosis 1. It get arrested over there at the birth time. This is what actually. Then the follicles started reducing, and then what happens then when the girl child she attains the puberty, then what happens அதுக்கப்புறம் restart ஆகும். Arrest freeze ஆன process திருப்பி ஸ்டார்ட் ஆகும். in between gapல என்ன ஆயிருக்குன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, follicles ஓட நம்பர் substantial reduce ஆக ஆரம்பிக்கும். அப்ப கடைசியா உங்களுக்கு இருக்கிற கவுண்டிங் பாத்தீங்கன்னா 60,000 to 80,000 follicles மட்டும்தான் which left by the each ovary. ஒவ்வொரு ஓவரிலையும் எவ்வளவு உங்களுக்கு follicles இருக்குன்னா 60,000ல இருந்து 80,000. இதுல இருக்கிற 60 to 80,000 எக் தான் என்ன ஆகும், ஒவ்வொரு menstrual cycleலயும் ஒவ்வொரு எக் என்ன பண்ணனும், ஓவரியில இருந்து வெளியில வரும். This will be used like till the menopause time வரைக்கும், menopause period வரைக்கும் இந்த process போயிட்டு இருக்கும். So again it's actually the complex process. Again that's the reason I told you why oogenesis is a complex. இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு strict இந்த restrictions எங்க கிடையாதுன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா spermatogenesisல கிடையாது. Okay, it's not in the male. Only in female you could see in case of this process which occurs, it started with the fetal stage in the embryo and getting end in the fertilization. Once she attains the puberty, after the puberty what happens, the primary oocyte which got arrested before, it again restart. With restart again, now what happens, the secondary oocyte will be formed, followed by the first meiotic division and the second meiotic division. Another thing you could see where the first meiotic division, second meiotic division, secondary oocyte, அப்போ ஒரு ஓவரியில இருந்து வெளியில வர எக்க நம்ம என்ன சொல்றோம்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, it's unfertilized egg. It's not a fertilized egg. நம்ம என்ன நினைப்போம், ஓவரியில இருந்து எக் ப்ரொடியூஸ் ஆனாலே அது fertilized. It's not a fertilized egg. It's a unfertilized egg only. அப்போ ஒரு unfertilized egg, the other name is a secondary oocyte. Produce ஆகிறது secondary oocyte தான். This secondary oocyte which comes and reach the fallopian tube, and it will be waiting for the sperm. If the fertilization occurs, now what happens, this will become fertilized egg. Now the oogenesis process comes to an end. If fertilization நடக்கவே இல்ல அப்படினா என்னன்னா, அப்ப oogenesis processக்கு ஒரு முடிவு இருக்காது. அந்த process கண்டினியூவா over menstrual cycle நடந்துகிட்டே இருக்கும். So this occurs till the menopause. The fertilization has not occurred till that point of time. So it means oogenesis process நடக்காது. ஏன்னா fertilization நடந்தாதான் எந்த process எண்டுக்கு வரும், oogenesis process ஒரு conclusion வரும். So that is why I told in the beginning itself why the oogenesis process something tricky and why it is a complex process. It's not like that of the spermatogenesis. In the basic understanding that we should know. And when come to the first, I mean the meiotic divisions varumbodhu, you could see the polar body formation. Neenga divisions la paakumbodhu, this you could see the secondary oocyte, and here this could see the first polar body, and you could see the second polar body, and this polar bodies will start degenerated. So the polar body enna nadakona, even after the fertilization which takes place, like after the formation of the matured cells, this again start degenerate. You can ask, sir, what will be the fate of the polar body? The polar bodies will start degenerative. Only the the functional, the secondary oocyte which will be going for the fertilization. Once it's fertilized, then the oogenesis process comes to an end. And this is how you need to recollect the difference between the spermatogenesis and the oogenesis. This for your understanding. Now, what are the factors which affect spermatogenesis or spermatogenesis process? Enna factors la affect agum? First one, the GnRH. What is expansion for GnRH? GnRH stands for gonadotrophic releasing hormone. Nam endocrine system le already padichom. So GnRH, this stimulates the anterior pituitary. Now pituitary gland padikumbodhu anti-adenohypophysis, neurohypophysis, இந்த ரெண்டு இதுவா பிரிச்சு படிச்சோம் இல்லையா? So this GnRH which activates the anterior pituitary, which then stimulates or secretes the follicle stimulating hormone. We call it as FSH, that is a follicle stimulating hormone. Now this FSH stimulates the process of, இப்போ இந்த FSH தான் என்ன பண்ணுன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா spermatogenesis process influence. For particular male in the hormone secretion edo problem irundaduna, then definitely the male cannot secrete and produce enough sperms, then sperm counts less agadhu chances hormonal problem sila perukku problem. So where the GnRH which influences FSH in turn will lead to the the process of spermatogenesis. This is one factor. Second one, the GnRH also stimulates luteinizing hormone. So this we also call it as ICSH. What is the expansion for ICSH? Okay, ICSH. So luteinizing hormone, intercortical stimulating hormone, ICSH. Okay, so GnRH also stimulates the LH and FSH, which causes secretion of testosterone from the testes. You ask a question like least effects if the pituitary is removed. If the, because the pituitary is the, what is it called? Actually, it's a master's gland actually. So the endocrine system oda master gland இருக்கிறது வந்து pituitary gland. இப்போ இந்த pituitary gland வந்து நம்ம remove பண்றோம் அப்படினு கேட்டிங்கன்னா, for example hormonal control, hormonal regulation, the feedback mechanism, இது even though masters of the masters வந்து hypothalamus இருந்தாலும் hypothalamus which cannot execute its functions directly, அது யார் மூலமா செயல்படுத்தும் அப்படினு கேட்டா pituitary gland மூலமா தான். இப்போ pituitary gland நம்ம எடுத்துறோம் வெளியில அப்படினு கேட்டிங்கன்னா hormonal imbalance, endocrine system ல flopல போய் நிக்கும். சரிங்களா? pause ஆகி நிக்கும். So pituitary gland which plays a very important role. Okay, fine. So GnRH also stimulates LH and ICSH, which cause secretion of testosterone. This I told you already, like androgens we call it as, from the testis. And testosterone also stimulates the process called as spermatogenesis. So two factors. One is the follicle stimulating hormone stimulate பண்ணுது. The other one is testosterone. So testosterone also stimulating spermatogenesis. The ரெண்டுத்துல எந்த ஹார்மோன்ல எந்த ப்ராப்ளம் வந்தாலும் the male will be get affected, where definitely it affects the spermatogenesis. So spermatogenesis, then definitely the sperm counts will be reduced. Actually, a fully formed spermatozoa pass through the male genital passage. They undergo the process called as maturation. So this undergoes a maturation process. Very shortly we're going to discuss capacitation, sperm capacitation. At the time of fertilization, even though like the female copulatory organ, for example the sperm which comes outside, the spermatozoa velila vandalum, until it just crossed all the obstacles ella daandi fallopian tube poi or egg poi fertilize pandra varaikum, like the obstacles which continues for the sperms, actually the tough race which continues, the survival of fittest concept which occurs as far as sperm is concerned. So adu varaikum kuda enna aguna, the maturity which matters a lot, that we'll discuss in the capacitation process. Okay, fine. So temperature, mostly sometimes like idella or factors இருந்தாலும் external factors, extrinsic factors இருந்தா temperatures இருக்கு. So temperature because another சில பேர் body temperature வந்து proper maintain ஆகல, thermo regulations normal நடக்கலனா, that also which affects the sperm count. So temperature, the secretion of the epididymis, we already discussed seminal vesicles, prostate, in the very glands or accessory glands or secretions. I told you already, seminal plasma 90% secretions இருக்கும். The remaining 10% only we have the sperms here. So the secretions are playing very important role because that is a place where the sperms gets the nourishment and the nutritions for the remaining purpose. And the seminal vesicles, prostate, have the stimulating effect on the sperm motility. If the secretions are not exactly produced, okay, not secreted properly, then it affects the motility. But complete motility only after ejaculation. அதுக்காக எபிடிடைமிஸ்ல இருக்கும்போது சார் அது மொட்டையில இருக்காது, மொட்டையில தான் இருக்கும், ஆனா அது ஸ்டோர் ஆயிருக்கு இல்லையா. கம்ப்ளீட் ஒரு ஆக்ஷனுக்கு எப்போ வரும் அப்படின்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, once after that, the time of ejaculation, when it's reached the female reproductive tract, once at that point of time only, it will be highly motile, complete motility it reach. It will shows a gentle motility. It crosses the acidic pH of the vagina, then to the cervical canal, then the endometrium, and then it reaches the fallopian tube. At the time of fertilization, it shows a whip kind of movement. The movement is entirely different in case of the sperms. And the இடத்துல வந்து ஸ்பெர்மோட மூவ்மெண்டே வேற மாதிரி இருக்கும் at the time of fertilization. Initial motility-க்கும் at the time of fertilization the spermோட motility-க்கும் வந்து நிறைய difference வந்து இருக்கு. It was actually scientifically proven. Fertilization time வந்து spermோட motility is entirely different. Initial point of time, the time of ejaculation-ல வந்து spermோட motility வந்து it's entirely different. Okay, so these are the factors which affect the spermatogenesis. Now we move on to the oogenesis. Already I just gave the comparison of spermatogenesis and oogenesis. Enough details நம்ம already oogenesis பத்தி படிச்சிட்டோம். But still, the formation of ovary, female வரும்போது ovary, male வரும்போது testis ல. So ovary is in the ovary from the primordial germ cells, where it's said to be oogenesis in case of a female. In multiplication phase, here also the same way, multiplication phase, growth phase, maturation phase. இந்த மூணு phase வந்து ரெண்டுத்துக்குமே காமன், ரெண்டு ப்ராசஸ்க்குமே. Where in multiplication phase என்ன நடக்கும்னா, a small clusters formed from the germinal epithelial cells are differentiated to form, first it forms oogonium. நம்ம already the flow chart உங்களுக்கு சொன்னேன். Oogonium. All oogonia to be used throughout the life of a woman are produced at the early stage before the birth and do not multiply thereafter. So இதுதான் முக்கியமான விஷயம். ஏன் ஃபீமேல் oogenesisல வந்து காம்ப்ளெக்ஸ்னு சொல்றேன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, the oogonium எங்க ப்ரொடியூஸ் ஆயிருக்குன்னா fetal stageலயே ஃபார்ம் ஆயிடுச்சு. It's getting produced until the determinal factor. எப்படி டிட்டர்மைன் ஆயிடுச்சுன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, birth பிறக்கும் போதே டிட்டர்மைன் ஆயிட்டு தான் அப்புறம் தான் பெண் குழந்தை பிறக்கும். Then after 60,000 and 80,000 இருக்கிற follicles தான் the female she going to utilized after the puberty. That this point that you should remember. In growth phase, oogonium attains a maturity and primary oocyte is getting produced during the growth phase. Now, during the maturation phase, it undergoes two meiotic division, first meiotic division and second meiotic division, and produce the first polar body and second polar body. The fate of the polar bodies, these start degenerating, right? And secondary oocyte, this is secondary oocyte வந்து தான் actual term என்னன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, ஒரு ஓவரியில இருந்து வெளியில முட்டை வெளியில வருதுன்னா அது வந்து ஃபெர்டிலைஸ்ட் கிடையாது. அதுக்கு பேர் ஆக்சுவல் என்னன்னா செகண்டரி ஊசைட் தான் வெளியில வருது. இந்த செகண்டரி ஊசைட் தான் எங்க வந்து நிக்கும்னா ஃபெலோப்பியன் டியூப்ல வந்து நிக்கும். ஃபெர்டிலைசேஷன் நடந்து முடிச்ச பிறகுதான் that we call it as what? That we call it as fertilized egg. Fertilization நடக்காத வரைக்கும் oogenesis processம் முடியாது. Fertilization முடியாதனால we call that one as a secondary oocyte or unfertilized egg தான் அது இருக்கும், right? However, second meiotic division is suspended until the union of the male and the female gamete. So எது வரைக்கும் அத ஸ்டாப் பண்ணி வைக்கும், செகண்ட் மியோட்டிக் டிவிஷன் வந்து பாஸ் பட்டன் வச்சு நிக்கும். எது வரைக்கும் கேட்டா, ஒரு ஸ்பெர்ம் வந்து ஃபியூஸ் ஆகும்போது தான் உங்க செகண்ட் மியோட்டிக் டிவிஷன் கம்ப்ளீட் ஆகி then it will become a fertilized egg. அது வரைக்கும் it will be suspended as a secondary oocyte only. So it will not proceed further. So oogenesis process will not come to an end. In the understanding புரிஞ்சிடுச்சுனா, it will be easy for you to answer any type of questions which come from oogenesis and gametogenesis. Now the next part, difference. At this point of time, we can differentiate in a simple way like spermatogenesis and oogenesis. Location, spermatogenesis, testis, where we could see, because it occurs entirely in the testis, where oogenesis which occurs mostly in the ovary. It's a primary sex organ, like in a male and then a female. Meiotic division, here you could see like equal division of a testis. Equal division of the cells that you could see. But inga oogenesisல வந்து unequal. ஏன் unequal சொல்றேன்? ஒன்னு வந்து secondary oocyte, இன்னொன்னு வந்து polar body form ஆகுது. Unequal division வரனால unequal division of the cytoplasm which occurs in this case because polar body is getting formed. So unequal division. But reduction division தான், ரெண்டு இடத்துலயும் reduction division தான். But இங்க equal division நடக்கும். oogenesisல வந்து unequal division வந்து நடக்கும். Germline epithelium வந்து is involved in the gamete production. Here it's not involved in the gamete production because it's going to produce only what is the secondary oocyte is getting produced. It's going to it's in the form of unfertilized sperm. Then it gets fertilized only after the fertilization process. Gametes pathina number produced here you could see the 4 numbers that you could see here. 1, because one that we call it as a secondary oocyte, the other one definitely it's a polar body, it's going to degenerate anyways. Actually number இது not only in this case, even நீங்க sexual reproduction flowering plants நீங்க படிக்கும்போது கூட நீங்க படிச்சிருப்பீங்க 4 megaspores produce பண்ணோம், out of 4 megaspores 3 get degenerated, only one is a functional, and the ஒன்னு வந்து என்ன ஆகும்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா will go for a monosporic development 7 cell nucleate stage ன்னு சொல்லிட்டு we discussed in case of plants la படிச்சோம், like in angiosperms like we discussed. So அங்க கூட பாத்தீங்கன்னா not only in animals, like even in the plants also the female reproduction part பாத்தீங்கன்னா கொஞ்சம் tricky and complex ஆ தான் இருக்கும். பட் அங்க வந்து மைக்ரோஸ்போரோஜெனசிஸ் ப்ராசஸ் நீங்க படிச்சிருக்கும் போது 4 ப்ரொடியூஸ் பண்ணா 4 டெட்ராட்ஸ்மே வந்து ஃபங்க்ஷனல் மைக்ரோஸ்போர்ஸ் தான் நீங்க படிச்சிருப்பீங்க இல்லையா? அதனால not only in mammals but also in this case, like you know, even in case of like plants நம்ம கம்பேர் பண்ணி பாத்தீங்கன்னா பிளான்ட்ஸ்ல எப்படி சார் மெகாஸ்போரோஜெனசிஸ் நீங்க படிச்சிட்டு இருக்கீங்க, அதுல கூட எப்படி தான் நடக்கும் கேட்டீங்கன்னா 4 ப்ரொடியூஸ் பண்ற மெகாஸ்போர், அந்த 4 மெகாஸ்போர்ல நாலுல 3 will get like you know degenerated and only one is functional. ஒன்னு தான் என்ன ஆகும் 7 cell nucleate stage monosporic development படிச்சிருக்கோம் சரியா? So size of gametes, sperm is smaller than the spermatocytes, ova is larger than the oocytes. This point that you should remember. Timing, as far as timing is concerned, duration, uninterrupted process, இது வந்து அதுதான் very interesting factor in spermatogenesis. இது நடுவுல இங்க ஸ்டாப் ஆகாது, like uninterrupted process, full process continuous நடந்துரும் spermatogenesisல. But oogenesis you could see in arrested stages, fetal stage ஆரம்பிக்குது, பிறக்கும்போது ஸ்டார்ட் ஆகுது, திருப்பி again restart இங்க வருது, pubertyல ஸ்டார்ட் ஆகுது, then again எங்க ஸ்டார்ட் ஆகுதுன்னா menopause போய் ஸ்டார்ட் ஆகும். So it's like it occurs in arrested stages, intermittent stageல இந்த process நடக்கும். Onset begins at the puberty, it's very common puberty நடக்கும், but it begins in the prenatal fetal stage itself. This makes a difference. It begins in the fetal stage itself. Release எப்படி இருக்கும், continuous process, but here monthly from the puberty. அப்பனா ஒரு மாதத்துக்கு அந்த menstrual cycleல வந்து that one particular time only the one ova is getting produced out of the ovary by means of cyclical change. This cycle only we call it as a menstrual cycle, but spermatogenesisல இந்த cycle கிடையாது. So only in oogenesis we call it as we have this menstrual cycle. We have the time duration for number next அதுதான் பார்ப்போம், the follicle phase, the luteal phase, இந்த மாதிரி different phases வந்து we going to discuss. End, lifelong. Spermatogenesis வந்து ஒரு முடிவு கிடையாது, but sometimes what happen, it reduces with age, like 60 plus, like you know 65 plus or 55 plus போகும்போது there will be the substantial reduction in the sperms, like you know, that occurs complete a cease ஆகாது. But in this case what happen, terminates in the menopause. So what is the age of the menopause? Usually sometimes like you know 45 ல கூட ஸ்டார்ட் ஆகும், but sometimes it occurs but 50 or 55 plus கூட என்ன ஆகும்னா 50 லயே என்ன ஆயிடும் கேட்டிங்க, the menopause which occurs. menarche beginning of the first menstrual cycle, menopause வந்து completion, கடைசி menstrual cycle முடிஞ்சு அதுக்கு அப்புறம் menstrual cycle நடக்காம போற அந்த ஸ்டேஜ் தான் we call it as a menopause. Okay, so we done with this part. Puberty. So this we have like you know, once the reproduction, so the boy or a girl when attains the puberty, like in the slight difference, like you know, what be the signs and symptoms of in case of boys and what is the signs and symptoms of a girl's puberty, but no doubts were. So difference between neonate and infant. Neonate and the newborn வந்து என்ன சொல்றோம் கேட்டீங்கன்னா, newborn தான் நம்ம என்ன சொல்லுவாங்கன்னா newborn is called as neonate. Infant முதல்ல குழந்தை பிறந்த 6 மாசம் இருக்கிற குழந்தைய தான் நம்ம என்ன சொல்லுவோம்னா newborn or neonate ன்னு சொல்லுவோம். infant வந்து குழந்தை தவழ்ற வயசு வரைக்கும் மட்டும் நம்ம என்ன தவழ்ந்து ஒரு அடி எடுத்து வைக்க வரைக்கும் அது குழந்தை என்னதான் சொல்லுவோம்னா infant ன்னு நம்ம சொல்லுவோம். It's an infant. தவழ்ற வயசு வரைக்கும் இருக்கிற it takes like you know period of like you know even 1 year of time. So அந்த டைம் குழந்தை அடுத்து ஒரு அடி எடுக்கிற வரைக்கும் அது infant தான் சொல்லுவோம் சரிங்களா? So or like a child who is having the suckling nature, அது இருக்கும்போது குழந்தை வந்து அம்மா கிட்ட இருந்து பால் குடிச்சு வளர அந்த ஸ்டேஜ் கூட we call it as an infant. But neonates are like you know newborn, it's only for the first 6 months of time. Okay, fine. So here the puberty, very quick. See in girls the puberty, the first sign is the development age in pathina. Usually in girls this occurs at the age of 12 years. You could see in this case of girls. In boys also the puberty which occurs by the age of 11. So in the 11 years where the puberty, but there's slight variation, the difference 11 plus 12, 11 to 13 அந்த இதுல கூட நடக்கும். இது எப்ப ஏஜ்ல காட்டும் கேட்டீங்க, by the enlargement of testis. I told you already the scrotal sac la வந்து fetal stage la male child form ஆகும்போது scrotal sac குள்ள testis வராது. எப்போ testis வந்து scrotal sac குள்ள வந்து நிக்கும்னா at the 7th month, குழந்தை வந்து கரு வந்து 7th monthல உருவாகும் பொழுது தான் the testis என்ன ஆகும்னா this will come outside the abdominal cavity and come and reach the scrotal sac. அந்த 7 மாசம் குறைஞ்ச பட்சத்துல அது எங்க இருக்குன்னா abdominal cavity உள்ள தான் இருக்கும். அதுக்கப்புறம் தான் it descends, the testis will descends out of the abdominal cavity and come and like settled inside the scrotal sac, and then the remaining process takes place. Okay, changes in boys and changes in girls. Boys wave increase in the height very quickly and later than the girls actually. So boys பார்க்கும்போது girls ஓட கம்பேர் பண்ணும்போது boys ஓட height வந்து அதிகமா increase ஆகும். So height increases very quickly and earlier than the boys here. The shoulders become broader. In boys, the shoulders become broader. This is one of the important sign where the boy attains the puberty. Here, not the shoulder, hips. Hips will become a broader in case of a girl. This is actually secondary sexual characters, like the hip will become broader. Where the phase alters, changes in phases are more pronounced like them than a girls actually. Here, phase alters, changes in phase and are less distinctive than boys actually. So boys பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் phase வந்து என்ன once attains the puberty, phase என்ன ஆகும்னா a sudden transfiguration which occurs when compared to the girls actually. Girlsல பாத்தீங்கன்னா substantial கொஞ்சம் கொஞ்சம் நடந்தாலும் boysல வந்து abrupt facial expressions, facial changes ஏற்படும். Then voice become lower and deeper in case of boys. Here the voice which becomes higher in case of a girls here. Then body hair, facial hair start grow in case of a boys, like bird motion and all that you could see. Then body hair starts to grow even in case of the females here. Testis produces sperm cells. This occurs in case of a boys, where ovaries which produce the egg cells in case of a girls here. Then nocturnal emission occurs. இங்க வந்து menstruation இங்க கிடையாது. ஏன்னா இங்க boys sideல பாத்தீங்கன்னா spermatogenesisல there is no menstrual cycle, the menstruation இங்க கிடையாது. But இங்க அதுக்கு பதில் என்ன நடக்கும்னா we have something called as nocturnal emission occurs. This is actually kind of sign that you could see the boy attains the puberty. But females, like what is the sign she attains the puberty? This can be confirmed by means of menstruation. The first menstrual cycle which begins, by that we can confirm she attains the puberty. So this is the difference between the puberty of boys and the girls. Next, hormonal control of your puberty. So puberty பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் ஹார்மோனோட பங்கு என்ன, ஹார்மோனோட ரோல் என்னன்றதை we'll discuss in this particular slide. Okay, fine. So come to the hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, gonadal axis. In late childhood, this all under the control of the hypothalamus, because hypothalamus is the masters of the master gland. Pituitary வந்து master gland சொன்னாலும் the one which controls the pituitary is what? Is the hypothalamus. So in late childhood, GnRH, gonadotrophic releasing hormone, to reach the pituitary, which synthesize, I told you already, like luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, that is FSH. Nocturnal, diurnal, nocturnal சொல்லுவோம். Diurnalக்கு nocturnalக்கு என்ன difference? பகலெல்லாம் nocturnal means what? Night எல்லாம் முழிச்சிட்டே இருந்தா தூங்காம முழிச்சிட்டு இருக்கவங்க தான் என்ன சொல்லுவோம்? Nocturnal சொல்லுவோம். எலியெல்லாம் பாத்தீங்கன்னா it's a nocturnal habitat. அதெல்லாம் நைட்ல முழிச்சிட்டு இருக்கும், பகல்ல தூங்கும். So diurnal, nocturnal. Diurnal வந்து day, nocturnal வந்து night. So night வந்து they stay awake, they will not sleep actually. So they stay awake, usually they work in the night shifts. அப்பலாம் பார்க்கும்போது they are actually like nocturnal in habitat. It means they stay awake in a night time. Usually the rodents இந்த மாதிரி animals எல்லாம் பாத்தீங்கன்னா night timeல தான் முழிச்சிட்டு இருக்கும். Okay, fine. So neonates, so need not get confused. Neonates are the newborn. I mean newborn or the neonates for the first 6 months. But infant வந்து you take like first 1 year 2 years வரைக்குமே கூட அது குழந்தை தான். So குழந்தைன்றது infantன்னு சொல்லுவோம். குழந்தை அப்படின்றது அது infant. Neonate வந்து புதுசா பிறந்திருக்க குழந்தை, அது முதல் 6 மாசம் இருக்கிற அந்த குழந்தைய தான் நம்ம என்ன சொல்லுவோம்னா neonate or newborn சொல்லுவோம். சரியா? So don't get confused with this. So these act as a steroids and release estradiol in case of girls, the testosterone. Testosterone level வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா பிளாஸ்மால, உங்க பிளட்ல இருக்க பிளாஸ்மால is less than 10 nanogram. It's a 10 nanogram before puberty. Girl sides-ல பாத்தீங்கன்னா the testosterone ஓட level பாருங்க எப்படி gradually increase ஆகுது. Before puberty வரைக்கும் அதோட range எவ்வளவு இருக்கும்னு பாத்தீங்கன்னா உங்களோட ஹார்மோன் testosterone வந்து உங்க பிளாஸ்மால, girls-ஓட பிளாஸ்மால பாத்தீங்கன்னா you could see the less than 10 nanogramல தான் இருக்கும் before puberty. And early puberty, you could see the testosterone level is 20 to 20. எத்தனை fold increase ஆயிருக்கு பாருங்க. Early puberty is 20 to 240 nanogram that you could see in the early puberty. In girls, this estradiol, we call it as rise to the puberty of 50 pg na picogram. 50 picogram in the follicular stage. அது கூட menstrual cycle differ ஆகும். Follicle stage ல 50 picogram and like other phases இந்த luteal phase ல எல்லாம் பாத்தீங்கன்னா 150 picogram. அப்பனா 50 ல இருந்து 150 picogram க்கு வந்து increase ஆகும் in case of the female, which hormone estradiol. Estradiol வந்து என்ன ஆகும்னா through the puberty 50 picogram ல இருந்து 150 picogram ஒரு phase ல இருந்து இன்னொரு phase க்கு போகும்போது substantially it will change or increase. Then adrenal androgens, you could see the adrenal androgens will start to rise by 8 years of age and continuing rise until the 13 to 15 years in both girls and adrenal பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் both male as well as in female. In கேக்கலாம் not only the pituitary gland, even adrenal gland. You discussed about the glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids. அதுல ஒரு முக்கியமா 6 corticoids பத்தி நம்ம படிச்சிருக்கோம். இந்த zona pellucidia, zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata நம்ம endocrine system படிக்கும்போது படிச்சோம் இல்லையா? I hope you can recollect. அதுல 6 corticoids பத்தி படிச்சோம். அதுல இந்த estradiol பத்தி நம்ம படிச்சிருக்கோம். So அதுல where you would have seen like this the adrenal cortex, where you could see the androgens, which also playing very important role in producing secondary sexual characters, both in case of males and as well as females. So you before you ask a question, sir, pituitary gland வந்து இல்ல அப்படின்னா ஃபுல்லாவே சீஸ் ஆயிடுமா sexual characters அப்படின்னா certain secondary sexual characters still function by means of the 6 corticoids மூலமா அந்த function இருக்கதான் செய்யும். பட் ஆனா அதையும் கண்ட்ரோல் பண்றது யாரு அப்படின்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா this directly under the control of the pituitary gland, that is by the hypothalamus. Okay, so this promote the pubic and the axillary hair growth. This is responsible over here. So here this comes like hormonal control of puberty. Okay, we're done with this. Now we go with the two types of cycle, menstrual cycle and the estrous cycle. Okay. Menstrual cycle and the estrous cycle. First, the menstrual cycle, because the next slide we're going to discuss about the menstrual cycle. At this point of time, you must know there are two types of cycle. Non-primates, for example, cow, sheep, the rat, deer, dogs, tiger. This type of cycle we call it as a estrous. Estrous அப்படின்னா heat ன்னு அர்த்தம். Heat generation. Female, where in that the rat and the deer, dogs எல்லாம் பாத்தீங்கன்னா for example breeding season, ஒரு particular season இருக்கு. எல்லா டைமும் நீங்க படிச்சிருப்பீங்க seasonal breeders. ஒரு பர்டிகுலர் டைம்ல தான் சில அனிமல்ஸ் வந்து ப்ரீட் ஆகும், அதுக்கப்புறம் ப்ரீட் ஆகாது. And that particular breeding season what happened, like the female like animal will start producing excessive heat generation. Bodyல இருந்து ஒரு type of heat generate ஆகும். And the heat generate ஆகும்போது தான் the females will get the strong sexual desire, the female animal. Then it go for the copulate with the female, and then again like the fertilization takes place. In the type of cycle, இதான் நம்ம என்ன சொல்றாங்கன்னா estrous cycle, there will be a heat generation அப்படின்னு சொல்லுவோம். இங்க வந்து the blood discharge, menstrual cycle, menses இந்த மாதிரிலாம் இங்க நடக்காது. That is what actually I want to make up the difference between estrous cycle and the menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle எங்கெல்லாம் நடக்கும்னா in primates, where you could see the monkey, apes and human beings, like in all these cases we could see the menstrual cycle. And menstrual cycle which consists of the menstrual phase, proliferative phase and the secretory phase. இந்த மாதிரி மூணு phases நடக்கும். All together 28 days time actually. The 28 days ல வந்து the cyclical changes which takes place in case of menstrual cycle. But in case of estrous cycle, it's a short period of estrus, just ஒரு டைம் heat generation மாதிரி வரும். அந்த heat produce பண்ற அந்த டைம் தான் நம்ம என்ன சொல்லுவோம்னா estrus, அதாவது heat, I mean the cycle will continues, and that is a suitable or favorable season for the particular animal. It go for a breeding. அது சூட்டபிளான சீசன் கிடையாது breeding அப்படின்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா அந்த இடத்துல breeding இருக்க அனிமல்ஸ் வந்து breeding போகாது. சரிங்களா? சிலது வந்து கண்டினியூஸ் பிரீடர், சிலது நான் கண்டினியூஸ் பிரீடர், சிலது வருஷத்துக்கு 2 தடவை பிரீட் ஆகும், சிலது வருஷத்துக்கு 1 தடவை மட்டும் தான் பிரீட் ஆகும். அனிமல்ஸ் which keeps varying actually, like இந்த மாதிரி habitats நம்ம ecosystem நம்ம படிக்கும்போது கூட இந்த breeding pattern பத்தி நம்ம ஆல்ரெடி படிச்சோம். I hope you can recollect it. Okay, fine. So blood flow in the cycle, இதுல blood வந்து loss ஆகும். எங்க menstrual cycle we call it as a menses for 3 days which occurs the menses in case of menstrual cycle. But estrous cycle la, because there's no rupture of the endometrium which will not occur in this case, because the endometrium will come back to its own form, actual lining which come back to its form. So no blood loss, the ruptures of the blood vessels which not takes place in this case in estrous cycle. So there is no blood loss and a blood flow in this particular cycle. So by these 3 main points we can differentiate like estrous cycle and the menstrual cycle. And examples மட்டும் பாத்துங்க. Sometimes which among the following which executes like estrous cycle questions வந்தாலும் you can answer. Primates வந்து menstrual cycle, non-primates வந்து estrous cycle. Okay. Now menarche and the menopause. As far as the female is concerned, what is menarche? That this you know already. The appearance of the first menstrual flow. Puberty ஆன பிறகு first நடக்கிற menstrual cycle we call it as a menarche. The life of the girl, this occurs in between the age of 11 and 13. இந்த ஏஜ்க்குள்ள வந்து இப்ப நார்மல் லைக் she is growing, எல்லா ஹார்மோன்ஸ் நார்மலா இருக்கிற பட்சத்துல between the age of 11 and 13, the menarche which occurs in this case. But menopause, what is menopause? The permanent disappearance of the menstrual cycle, it ceases actually. So this is actually the difference that we discussed between oogenesis and spermatogenesis. One point of age la enna aidum females la kadina complete vandu the menstrual cycle gets ceased or stopped here. So in the life of a woman, it may occur between the 45 to 50 years kulla stop at. சில பேருக்கு 45 ல சில பேருக்கு வந்து 50 years. It depends upon the lifestyle, depends a lot of factors also which is responsible. We cannot justify 45 தான் 15 சொல்ல முடியாது. Between 45 to 50 years of age, menopause can occur. 50 க்கு மேல போய் 51 போனாலும் we cannot question ஏன் 15 வரைக்கும் menopause போயிருக்கா. We cannot ask this question, but general 45 and 50 years of age. In this phase, ovarian follicle results in the low estrogen and hence raised levels of follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. These two hormones which plays a very important role. It also leads to decline in bone mass. ஏன் படிப்படி என்ன ஆகும்னா மெனோபாஸ்ல அவங்களோட போன் டென்சிட்டி இருக்கு, போன் மாஸ் என்ன ஆகும்னா படிப்படி கம்மி ஆகிட்டு வரும். எப்போ இதெல்லாம் எதை வச்சு கண்டுபிடிக்கலாம்? அவங்களுக்கு வந்து மெனோபாஸ் நடக்குதுன்றத உங்களுக்கு மெனார்ச் எப்போ நடக்குன்னு தெரியும். பிகாஸ் மென்ஸ்ட்ரல் சைக்கிள் யூ கேன் they can identify. பட் மெனோபாஸ் நடக்கிறதுக்கு சில சிம்டம்ஸ் இருக்கு. அவங்க மெனோபாஸ்ல இருக்கிறாங்க இந்த 45 to 50 இயர்ஸ் வர ஏஜ்ல வந்து இந்த சிம்டம்ஸ் எல்லாம் தெரியும். என்னென்ன சிம்டம்ஸ் வரும்னா டிக்ளைன் இந்த போன் மாஸ், ரொம்ப வீக் ஆவாங்க, படி ஏறது கஷ்டப்படுவாங்க, மூட்டு வலி வரும், இந்த மாதிரி சில சிம்டம்ஸ் வந்து ஆரம்பிக்கும். தென் ஹார்ட் ஃபிளஷஸ் when they actually like defecate, அந்த டைம்ல வந்து ஹார்ட் ஃபிளஷஸ் வந்து இந்த கான்ஸ்டிபேஷன் மாதிரி, அது கான்ஸ்டிபேஷன் மாதிரி சொல்ல முடியாம ஹார்ட் ஃபிளஷா வரும் ஸ்டார்டிங் பிகினிங். அப்ப தட் இஸ் a symptom it shows like விமன் அவங்களுக்கு என்ன நடக்குதுன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா மெனோபாஸ் நடக்குதுன்றது அர்த்தம். Then cutaneous vasodilation, psychological disturbances, சின்ன சின்ன விஷயத்துல டிஸ்டர்ப் ஆவாங்க, சைக்கலாஜிக்கலா என்ன ஆவாங்கன்னா கொஞ்சம் டிஸ்டர்பிங்கா இருப்பாங்க. Then dizziness, fatigue condition, தலைவலி இருக்கும், headache, chest and the neck pain, சில கழுத்து வலி, chest pain இருக்கும். Insomnia are common. So these are, what is insomnia? What do you mean by insomnia? Insomnia means what? So weight loss, sometimes like அதுக்காக weight loss, sometimes weight loss சில நேரத்துல வந்து this because of women is having like some thyroid problems, hyperthyroidism அப்படின்னா வர ஸ்டேஜ்ல weight increase ஆகிறதுக்கும் chances இருக்கு. அந்த ஏஜ்ல அவங்களுக்கு வந்து தைராய்டு வரும்போது there are chances of like gain in the body weight also. So that also will be the taken for consideration. அப்போ டாக்டர்ஸ் கேட்பாங்க தைராய்டு இருக்கான்னு டெஸ்ட் பண்ணிட்டு அதுக்கப்புறம் மெனோபாஸ் தான் பார்ப்பாங்க. சரிங்களா? So this also which occurs in case of menopause. Next we move on to the embryonic development. Coming to the embryonic development, so இப்போ என்ன ஆயிடுச்சு, zygote form ஆயிடுச்சு, fertilization நடந்துருச்சு. So embryonic developmentல study of the development of an organism from the fertilization to the formation of young one is called as embryogeny. This includes the changes by which the fertilized ovum is transformed into an adult actually. For example, this is a secondary oocyte I'm talking about. The secondary oocyte is getting fertilized with the sperm actually. So இத நாம என்ன சொல்றோம்னா this is not the fertilized egg now. This is the secondary oocyte. The secondary oocyte fallopian tube வந்து சில days தங்கி நிக்கும். அந்த நேரத்துல sperm வந்துச்சுன்னா this get fertilized and this secondary oocyte will become a fertilized egg. Now the oogenesis process gets over. இப்போ என்ன ஆகும், the zygote, now this is N, the ploidy of egg is N, I mean secondary oocyte is N, the sperm is N, this N and N, that this will become 2N, so this will become diploid. So 2N மாறும்போது then 2 will become 4, 4 will become 8, 8 will become 16. இந்த மாதிரி divisions வந்து increase ஆயிட்டே போகும். Right? So the formation of sex cells are called it as, we call it as gametogenesis. A special type of nuclear divisions called meiosis takes place in this case. Then the structural changes in a zygote leading to the formation of adult form is said to be the embryonic. ஒரு சின்ன ஒரே ஒரு கெமீட்ல இருந்து, ஒரு haploid கெமீட்ல இருந்து ஒரு டிஷ்யூஸ், ஒரு ஆர்கனோ, ஒரு கம்ப்ளீட்டா ஒரு எம்பிரியோ ஃபார்ம் ஆகி அதுக்கு leads to formation of fetus. ஒரு எம்பிரியோ எப்படி டெவலப் ஆகுதோ அதுதான் we going to discuss in this part. This development is called as embryonic development. அதுதான் என்ன ஆகுது, ஒரு ஃபீட்டஸ் ஆகி ஒரு குழந்தையா வெளியில வருது. சோ அத பத்தி தான் we going to discuss in the next coming slides. Okay. இப்போ fertilization in humans, you ask this question. So இப்போ egg produce ஆச்சு, இதற்கு நம்ம பார்த்தோம். இப்போ fertilization எப்படி நடக்கணும், how the sperm supposed to reach, when the sperm supposed to reach, what are the transformation should take place in the female reproductive tract, இதெல்லாம் பத்தி we going to discuss in the thing. We going to discuss about amniotic sac and all these things in this part. Right? So fertilization in humans, the fusion of the male and female gametes to form zygote is called as zygote. அப்படினா haploid and male gamete and female gamete, this leads to the formation of diploid 2N. This is called fertilization. If fertilization succeeds, then the secondary oocyte which completes the process called as oogenesis. In human female, fertilization takes place where? inside the fallopian tube. எங்க நடக்கும் அப்படின்னா fallopian tubeல நடக்கும். There are 5 stages of fertilization. இந்த human fertilization வந்து ஒரு 5 stages of பிரிச்சிருக்காங்க for your convenience, right? What is the first stage அப்படின்னு பார்த்தா fertilization என்ன sperm உள்ள during at the time of ejaculation ல இருந்து the sperm supposed to migrate அங்க இருந்து உள்ள போய் எக் செகண்டரி ஊசைட்ட போய் ரீச் ஆகணும், அன்ஃபர்டிலைஸ்ட் எக்க போய் ரீச் ஆகணும். இந்த கம்ப்ளீட் ப்ராசஸ் நடக்கிற இந்த ஏரியாவை தான் 5 ஸ்டேஜஸா பிரிச்சிருக்கும் இல்லையா? அப்புறம் மேல்ல இருக்க நியூக்ளியஸ் வந்து ஃபீமேலுக்குள்ள போகணும். So we'll discuss about one by one. Maturation and capacitation of the spermatozoa. Here the secretion of the epididymis, seminal vesicle and the prostate have the stimulating effect of the sperm. This we already told you. Indla irukka secretions ella the seminal plasma la irukka secretions which is going to give the better nourishment, which is going to enhance the motility of the sperm, but becomes fully motile after ejaculation only. It doesn't mean like epididymis irukka sperms motile irukada, motile da irukum, but complete action எப்போ வரும் கேட்டா after ejaculation only. The final step of the maturation is called as capacitation. This is called as capacitation. Okay, this is called as sperm capacitation. This is the first stage. First sperm complete matured ஆகணும். Okay வா? So how the maturation takes place? By means of the capacitation, by means of the secretions, the seminal secretions. Next stage வந்து coitus. Coitus is the parasympathetic nerves of the penis. So now the sperms are being secreted எல்லாம் okay, spermatogenesis. Male reproductive organ ல இருந்து வெளியில sperm வரணும். அதுக்கு என்ன பண்ணனும்னா coitus is responsible. Coitus எப்படி நடக்கும் அப்படினா where you could see a parasympathetic nerve to the penis and stimulates that cause the tremendous vasodilation. So it increases the blood supply to the penis. Number the corpora cavernosa, corpora spongiosum, in the medicinal tissues already shown. These tissues are responsible for the erection of the penis. This what happens this helps to retain the blood. In the corpora cavernosa spongiosum, this helps to retain the blood in the, increase the blood supply in the penis. So this leads to erection of penis. Then what happens which causes erection? This facilitates penis to penetrate the vagina to by the orgasm. So what happens is a strong sexual desire which is obtained here between the both male and female during ejaculations. Or ejaculation sperms இருக்கும் அப்படினு கேட்டா you could see 400 million spermatozoa, 4 million spermatozoa is getting produced. In this case இப்போ the 400 million spermatozoa ல வந்து ஏதோ ஒன்னு தான் is going to get succeed. So out of one particular ejaculation ல வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா out of 400 million spermatozoa, how many it's going to get succeed only, it matters a lot actually in this case. Okay guys, so we done with this part, that is fertilization, the first 2 stages. Third stage where you could see the active motile spermatozoa move to the female. If ejaculation மூலமா sperm எங்க வந்துருச்சு அப்படினு கேட்டிங்கனா it came to the female reproductive tract, right? It just came to the female reproductive tract inside. Okay, now once it reaches the female reproductive tract, if the speed of எவ்வளவு ஸ்பீட்ல போகும் அப்படினா 100 micrometers per second it moves. The sperm which moves inside the female reproductive tract, the speed of 100 micrometers per second, 100 micrometers per second it moves inside. Okay, so then the uterine and tubular musculature exert. So uterine wall எப்படி இருக்கும், அதோட anatomy எப்படி இருக்கும் உள்ள பாத்தீங்கன்னா the tubular musculature வந்து sucking effect இருக்கும். உள்ள இருக்க sperm வந்து eject பண்ணி வெளியில விடாது, it sucks inside. So it's having some kind of sucking effect where the uterine and the tubular musculature when the female reproductive system is present, and most of the sperms die in vagina. நீங்க உள்ள வர அவ்வளவு ஸ்பெர்ம்ஸும் fallopian tube க்கு போகாது. Other majority of the sperms die in the vagina itself. The reason ஏன் கேட்டீங்கன்னா it's due to because vagina என்ன pH அப்படினு கேட்டீங்கன்னா it's a acidic pH. So in the acidic pH where the sperms cannot tolerate this high pH, அதுல என்ன ஆயிடும்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா நிறைய sperms வந்து அங்கே செத்துரும், vaginaலே செத்துரும். மீதி இருக்கிற remaining spermatozoa என்ன பண்ணும்னா which creep inside the fallopian tube through the cervix மூலமா என்ன பண்ணும்னா it reaches the fallopian tube. So this occurs in this case. Okay guys, so now in the favorable phase of the menstrual cycle they can survive. உள்ள conditions favorable இருக்கு அப்படினா they can survive for about 72 hours in the uterus and the fallopian tube. Once உள்ள போன பிறகு இதெல்லாம் தாண்டி போன the sperms வந்து it can survive in the uterus and the fallopian tube. Once it crosses the vagina, that is like an acidic pH, this has a chance of surviving for the 72 hours. The viability of the sperms inside the female reproductive tract where you could see in the 72 மணி நேரம் வரைக்கும் sperms ஆல உள்ள viable இருக்க முடியும் if it is a favorable condition. In the fallopian tube it may wait for actually the egg to come, like maybe egg வரது வரைக்கும் உன வெயிட் பண்ணலாம். So it reach over there. Then only one sperm out of the millions reach the fallopian tube. overcoming the mechanical obstacles, lot of pH obstacles, lot of obstacles தாண்டி கடைசியா வர அந்த ஒரு sperm it just approach the female, and that one particular sperm which fertilized with the secondary oocyte, and that will become a fertilized one. So fertilization, this is how actually it get completed. Now ovum sperm interaction in the fallopian tube. Or ovum sperm எப்படி interact ஆக போகுது in the fallopian tube, how it's going to get interacted, that we're going to discuss in this particular chapter. In this particular part we're going to discuss. Here in this part we see the first process we discussed is the capacitation. The capacitation that we discussed already. What is capacitation? The maturation already நடந்திருக்கும். So we are calling it, the first is the capacitation, which is already occurred. Where the capacitation, where you could see in this case, sperms attains a functional maturity. The sperms attains a functional maturity is called as capacitations. Where what happens in capacitation, which removes all the sterols and glycoproteins and from the acrosomal membrane, and calcium are taken inside. So this is what actually which occurs especially in a capacitation, where the sperms attains already matured functional matured ஆகிறது and the process பேர் தான் capacitation, where the sperms become more active, more activated, more நல்ல ஆக்டிவா இருக்கிற அந்த ஸ்டேஜ் தான் capacitation அப்படின்னு சொல்லுவோம். அது என்ன பண்ணுன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, which removes all the glycoproteins. So what happens, the membrane will be exposed. For example, you could see this actually the sperm ஓட head ன்னு பாத்தீங்கன்னா, the sperm head எப்படி இருக்குன்னா, இதுக்கு மேல glycoproteins எல்லாம் இருக்கும். இந்த glycoproteins எல்லாம் என்ன பண்ணணும்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, remove பண்ணணும். இந்த glycoproteins எல்லாம் remove பண்ணாதான் the acrosome will be released, and the acrosome release ஆன பிறகு தான் then what happens, the nucleus which will be coming out. So for that, the capacitation process is very, very important, because in the capacitation process, the removal of sterols on the surface and the removal of glycoproteins on the surface, these all will be removed, and so that the acrosome can be easily penetrated, or the acrosome can be exposed outside. So what happens, and then what happens, the membrane will be exposed and it will weak, and it release the enzyme, the spermolysin. This we call it as spermolysin. This release a spermolysin, so that fertilization will be more easier. So this first stage வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா எப்படி இருக்கும்னா capacitation process which should occur in this case. Okay, so next, after this capacitation, we go for identification. Once the capacitation is getting over, the identification, we have something called as a fertilization. Fertilization is secreted by the ovum. Usually what happens, fertilization is secreted by ovum. என்ன பண்ணுன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, fertilization secrete பண்ணுவோம். Sperm என்ன secrete பண்ணும் பதிலுக்கு anti-fertilization is produced by the sperm. So once the ovum starts secreting the fertilization, in response to that, the sperm will start producing anti-fertilization. Then what happens, this can actually bind actually. So at point of time, this can bind to 2 to 3 sperms at the time. Then what happens, this should give some type of affinity. Okay, this kind of affinity between the sperms and the ovum. In the affinity நடக்கணும்னா இது என்ன secrete பண்ணும், ovum should secrete fertilization, and in response to that, sperm should secrete anti-fertilization. These are all actually spermiophilic sites which present on the ovum, on which எது போய் bind ஆகும்னா, sperm போய் எல்லா இடத்துலயும் போய் bind ஆகுது. ஒரு பர்టిక్యులர் ஏரியால where fertilization has been secreted, அந்த ஏரியால போய் the sperm போய் என்ன ஆகும் கேட்டா கரெக்ட்டா bind ஆயிருக்கும் மேல. புரியுதுங்களா? So there's a particular site on the ovum where this particular the sperm which go and bind actually. இது முடிஞ்ச பிறகு then we have the release of spermolysin in a lytic enzyme. Spermolysin we call it as a lytic enzyme. These are called lytic enzyme. So இதுக்கு அடுத்த ஸ்டேஜ்ல spermolysin, the lytic enzymes produce out. The lytic enzymes என்ன பண்ணுன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, corona digesting cells, because இந்த ஓவம் மேல ஒரு சில corona radiating cells வந்து மூடி இருக்கும். This we call it as a corona radiata ன்னு சொல்லுவோம். The corona radiata வெளில என்ன பண்ணுன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, இந்த spermolysin, the spermolysin will start digesting. Then we have a hyaluronidase. We have an enzyme called as hyaluronidase. This is very important enzyme, hyaluronidase. So we have the next spermolysin, hyaluronidase. This hyaluronidase, which will be it's act like a glue, right? Where the hyaluronidase, it secretes like hyaluronic acid. ஒட்டிட்டு இருக்க sperm திருப்பி வெளியில வராம இருக்கிறதுக்கு the hyaluronidase, which gives actually the beneficial, where it acts like a glue which attach onto the surface of the ovum, and also acrosin. This also produce acrosin. What is the main function of acrosin? The acrosome வந்து produce other secretions. Sperm the acrosome வந்து acrosin secrete out. This acrosin which digests zona pellucidia. அப்படின்னா ஒரு எக் எடுத்துக்கிட்டீங்கன்னா எக்க சுத்தி என்னென்ன இருக்கும்னா கொரோனா ரேடியேட்டா இருக்கும், zona pellucidia இருக்கும். ஃபர்ஸ்ட் கொரோனா ரேடியேட்டாவை டைஜஸ்ட் பண்றதும் this particular enzyme, lytic enzyme, that is corona penetrating digestive enzyme produce பண்ணும். Then we have something called as hyaluronidase. Then we have acrosin. This acrosin which specifically act on zona pellucidia. இதெல்லாத்தையும் கிளியர் பண்ணாதான் இந்த ஸ்பெர்மால என்ன பண்ண முடியும், இன்னும் பெனிட்ரேட் ஆகி எக்கோடைய அவுட்டர் லேயருக்குள்ள பெனிட்ரேட் பண்ண முடியும். So this what happened in case of spermatogenesis. So spermatogenesis மூணு விஷயங்கள் பார்த்தோம். ஒன்னு வந்து கொரோனா டைஜஸ்டிங் என்சைம், hyaluronidase enzyme, third வந்து acrosin enzyme. All these three which comes under spermatogenesis. இது முடிஞ்ச பிறகு என்ன நடக்கும்னா formation of fertilization cone. அப்போ கன்ஃபர்மேஷன் ஆகும்போது என்ன நடக்கும்னா, ஃபார் எக்ஸாம்பிள் யூ டேக் திஸ் இஸ் ஆக்சுவலி லைக் எக் எடுத்துட்டீங்கன்னா இந்த எக் என்ன பண்ணணும்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா கன்ஃபர்மேஷனுக்கு வந்து இந்த கோன் மாதிரி ஃபார்ம் ஆகும், சின்ன ஒரு கோன் மாதிரி ஃபார்ம் ஆகும், ஒரு பல்ஜ் மாதிரி வரும். This is actually called it as fertilization cone. இங்க the sperm வந்து attach ஆயிருக்கு. This is the sperm which is getting attached to this cone like arrangement which forms. This is called as fertilization cone. After this release of spermatogenesis, cone formation. In the cone formation ஆகும்போது என்ன ஆகும்னா this actually will start the meiosis 2, second meiotic division இப்போதான் ஸ்டார்ட் ஆகும். Understand guys, இப்போதான் oogenesis process முடிய போகுது. Spermatogenesis முடிஞ்சிருச்சு, but oogenesis will come to an end after the cone formation. What happens like this starts the meiosis 2, second meiotic division ஆரம்பிச்சு. Once this triggers the sperms, then what happens like the second polar body is there, right? The second polar body will start degenerated at this point of time. And what happened, the metaphase factors, the secondary oocyte, the metaphase factors deactivated. Then what happens, anaphase which promotes the factors which will be activated. So this is how actually what happens, the process which gets over. Once all this process gets over, at last you could see the cortical reaction takes place. So what happens in the cortical reaction? In the cortical reaction, the formation of fertilization membrane, you see the vitelline membrane. The vitelline membrane, perivitelline space, this you would have studied. The perivitelline space which will be formed. And then what happens like when the cortical granules released, then what happened? This which will be like, it presents like polyspermy. இது எதுக்காக cortical secretion னா ஒரு நேரத்துல ஒரு ஸ்பெர்ம் மட்டும் தான், ஒரு நியூக்ளியஸ் மட்டும் தான் உள்ள போகணும். சரியா? ஃபார் எக்ஸாம்பிள் ஒரு எக்ல வந்து 5-6 ஸ்பெர்ம் மேல ஒட்டிட்டு இருந்தாலும் எல்லா ஸ்பெர்மும் உள்ள போக கூடாது. ஒரு ஸ்பெர்ம் ஒரு டைம் ஃபெர்டிலைசேஷன்ல ஒரு ஸ்பெர்ம் மட்டும் தான் பெனிட்ரேட் ஆகணும். So it prevents oligospermia. What is oligospermia? Maybe like many sperms may be attached to the surface of the egg, but it allows only one sperm to penetrate inside, the nucleus to penetrate inside. So this is happening by means of the cortical reaction which takes place, where the cortical reactions which allows only one sperm's nucleus to get inside or penetrate inside the egg. So it prevents a condition called as oligospermia condition. So இந்த கண்டிஷன் முடிஞ்ச பிறகு மத்த எல்லா ஸ்பெர்ம்ஸ் ஒட்டிட்டு இருக்க ஸ்பெர்ம்ஸ் எல்லாம் விதட் ஆஃப், அதெல்லாம் என்ன பண்ணிட்டோம்னா மேல இருந்து வெளியில வாங்க விதட் ஆஃப், பிகாஸ் இட் அக்செப்டட் ஒன்லி ஒன். சோ அந்த ஒரே ஒரு மேல் கேமெட் மட்டும் என்ன பண்ணுன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா இட் கோஸ் இன்சைட் அண்ட் கெட் fusion will takes place. So fertilization succeeds. The remaining all other sperms which has got attached on the surface of the ovum will get withered off, வெளியில இருந்து மேல இருந்து வந்துரும். சரியா? So only one male gamete which nucleus which go and penetrate inside. At last fusion will takes place. Here the fusion, you could see the animal pole and the vegetal pole. ரெண்டு pole நீங்க படிச்சிருப்பீங்க. The animal pole and vegetal pole. What happens in animal pole and vegetal pole? Here the axis of the cleavage which takes place. Now what happens like the male gametes which go and fuse with the female gametes. So this is what actually the explanations like which is clearly explained over here. What happens like the sperm changes the whip-like movement. இங்க என்ன type of movement இருக்குன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா whip-like movement. It's not the normal movement actually. So here the acrosome membrane is lost, then the sperm release an hyaluronidase enzyme and else the removal of all the follicle cells like zona pellucidia, corona radiata. In the cells எல்லாம் remove பண்ணிடும். Already I told you. The hyaluronidase released by fallopian tube also aids in the removal of the follicles. Then the sperm penetrates the zona pellucidia, right? They are the acrosin மூலமா நடக்கும். At this stage the second polar body is extruded from the secondary oocyte. Then the male and female இருக்க chromatin which fuse together and form zygote. What is the chromosome number? 23 from the male and 23 from the female. This leads to the formation of 46 chromosome. I told you what is ectopic pregnancy. Implantation which occurs other than the uterus. This is called as ectopic pregnancy. Exactly. Right? So now egg to embryo. So ஒரு egg வந்து இப்போ embryo எப்படி மாறுதுன்றதை we going to discuss in the next part. So before that we'll just see what are significance of the fertilization. When you see the significance of fertilization, fertilization நடக்கணும். as far as significance of fertilization is concerned, why it should take place, where the fusion of the two gametes where genetic variation, male and the genes were, female and the genes were. So genetic variation is happening. So this is the first significance that you could see in case of fertilization. And here meiosis 2, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2 also is taking place. And here the cytoplasmic content is retained in the egg itself. It's not getting lost. The cytoplasmic containing particular type of egg, acolecithal, telolethal egg, centrolethal egg, type of eggs you படிச்சிருப்பீங்க. For example, if the cytoplasmic content is actually retained and species specific diploid number of chromosomes, number of here you could see the 46 chromosomes. Now the 46 chromosomes number is attained and all the metabolic activities are increased. Metabolic activities it start increasing over in this phase. And for example, you take more mitochondria, right? Then what happens? The centrioles of the sperms where the first zygotic division, then the copulation path. These are all actually the significance of the fertilization. Okay, now we move from egg to the embryo. From egg to the embryo part, if you see, it involves the cleavage, the morula, the blastocyst, and the gastrulation. It involves the cleavage in the holoblastic type. So the type of egg we call it is a holoblastic. Sometimes they'll ask this question: what do you mean by holoblastic? Holoblastic abhina, the entire zygote divides completely. So zygote is completely divided equal. So this type of egg is called as holoblastic egg. Human is an example for that. So first division of ovum takes place about 30 hours. First division of ovum 30 hours. So 30 hours, and every 12 hours the number of cells doubled year after, doubled after each division. Over 12 மணி நேரத்துக்கு அப்புறம் என்ன நடக்கும்னா டிவிஷன் அடுத்தடுத்து ஒவ்வொரு டிவிஷன் நடந்துட்டே இருக்கும். இப்போ first division நடக்கிறதுக்கு first division of ovum takes place in 30 hours of time. And after every 12 hours, one successive divisions where 2 will become next 4, 4 will become 8. இந்த மாதிரி நடந்துட்டே இருக்கும். இதுல for example, day 2, ரெண்டாவது நாள் பாத்தீங்கன்னா second day, 14th day ovulation, maybe the 15th or 16th day எடுத்துக்கங்க. இதுல fertilization நடக்கும். Then the cleavage occurs. Then the differentiation, day 4 differentiation நடக்கும். Then the cavity formation which will be taking place. Then successive changes which will be happening. So notochord formation, implantation, இந்த மாதிரி ஒவ்வொண்ணா நடந்துருக்கு. சரியா? So from egg to the embryo, this is where actually I'm talking about the ovary. This is the ovary where you could see what's the first thing that is happening is the ovulated egg, right? The ovulated egg, and this is the place the fertilization took place. I told you இங்க தான் நம்ம இவ்வளவு நேரம் பார்த்துட்டு இருக்கோம். fertilization, the sperm வந்து இங்க தான் fuse ஆகுது. இதுதான் எத்தனை மணி நேரம் ஆகும்னா it takes 31st division fertilization முடிஞ்சு first இது முடியறதுக்கு 30 hours it will take actually. So after that what will happen? This is day 0. The day 1, right? Now the zygote has been formed. So zygote would diploid on the 2N. So then what happens? Day 1, then the day 2. Day 2 what will happen? This form 2 cells actually. Then what happens this formed actually the 4 cells. Day 3 the 4 cells. Then what happens it forms a morula. Morula on the solid moss like structures or mulberry fruit mari or solid moss form agum. Idhula for example blastomia is it is getting formed, and then you could see the inner cell mass of the blastocyst is formed. Kadasiya the blastocyst enna aguna the day 7 ஏழாவது நாள் என்ன வரும்னா இது uterus uterine wall க்கு வந்து இங்க வந்து the embryo வந்து எங்க என்ன ஆகும்னா it get implanted over here. புதயம் இந்த இடத்துல வந்து புதயம். So the blastocyst will be implanted onto the surface of the endometrium. So on the uterine wall, இது வந்து uterine wall வந்து புதயும் போது then the progesterone level rapidly it will increase. இப்போ ஓவரிக்குள்ள என்ன நடக்கும்னா ஓவரிக்குள்ள யார் இருப்பா? corpus luteum will start secreting the hormone called as progesterone. The more of progesterone will be, once fertilization confirm ஆயிடுச்சு இந்த நேரத்துல என்ன ஆயிடும் கேட்டீங்கன்னா corpus luteum started stabilizing, estrogen level வந்து கம்மியாக ஆரம்பிச்சிருக்கும். So automatically what will happen, right? Automatically the progesterone level increases, then it leads to the implantation over in this case. Okay guys, so this is how actually the changes which takes place in the from the fallopian tube to the uterine wall to the uterus. Now blastocyst, coming to the blastocyst. So what happens with blastocyst? The morals in the morula. So the morula develops, this is a morula, this is not a morals, the morula. The morula develops a cavity around which cells are arranged and known as blastocyst. இப்போ என்ன ஆகும் கேட்டா blastocyst வந்து develop ஆகி அப்புறம் 72 hours it form the structure called as, here you could see the structure called as morula, right? The morula will be formed. The cells of the outer layer is the trophoblast. இதுல இருந்து questions வரும். Trophoblast இதுல இருந்து questions வரும். So when we talk about the blastocyst, the outermost layer is called as a trophoblast. You know blastocyst எடுத்துட்டீங்கன்னா the outermost layer we call it as a, this we call it as Trophoblast. This is a trophoblast. Then we have the inner cell mass. We have the inner cell mass inside. So we have the inner cell mass. So outermost this layer is called as, we call it as a trophoblast. Trophoblast. This is a inner cell mass. This is a inner cell mass. Together, this is called as blastocyst. This is called as blastocyst. So blastocyst like outermost layer than trophoblast. Inner cell mass. Inner cell mass. Then what happens, like, the phase of the blastocyst to which the inner cell mass is attached to called as the phase the inner cell mass இருக்கிற அந்த இடத்துல நம்ம என்ன சொல்லுவோம்னா we call it as an animal pole. This we call it as animal pole. The opposite ல இருக்கிறது வந்து vegetal pole அப்படின்றத we can categorize it, right? Also the inner cell mass contains stem cells. Inner cell mass ல mostly என்ன இருக்கும்னு கேட்டிங்கன்னா stem cells. இதுதான் later partல என்னவா கன்வெர்ட் ஆகும் அப்படின்னு கேட்டிங்கன்னா this will be converted to germ layers. ectoderm ஆவோ mesoderm endoderm அப்படின்றது tissue ஆவோ organ ஆவோ form ஆகும். division of labor வந்து இங்க இருந்து தான் ஸ்டார்ட் ஆகும், right? So which have the potency to give rise to tissues and the organs. Then the trophoblast cells destroy endometrial cells by lytic enzyme. இப்போ வந்து implantation நடக்கும்போது என்ன ஆகும்னா this will start secreting the lytic enzyme. கொஞ்சம் கொஞ்சமா இந்த என்ன ஆகும்னா blastocyst வந்து endometrium wall-ல போய் புதைய ஆரம்பிக்கும். Then only the placenta which covers the complete thing, because this embryo is going to be like a parasite, like only the placenta is going to protect the fetus from the mother's immune system. So then it sinks and completely buried in the uterus until the 9 month of time complete உள்ள buried பதிஞ்சிருக்கும். So this is how actually the blastocyst thing takes place. Then gastrulation of the germ layers, and most of the details are not given in your NCERT book, so I'm not going much in detail about this gastrulation process, but I just giving just one outline. It is important visible dynamic event in the embryonic development in which germ layers are differentiated. So the blastocysts also support the embryo and help to acquire the nutrition, where the blastocysts are not only like it's going to get implanted inside, but also it helps to acquire the nutrition. Okay, and the fluid that you see, the cavity, right, that is called as blastocyst. That was actually the fluid which is inside, right, in the blastocyst, and that fluid we call it as a blastocyst. Okay. And development of, someone asked like an amnion and the human embryo ஒரு 23 நாள் ஆன பிறகு என்ன ஆகும், embryo என்ன நடக்கும் அப்படினா, you could see the embryo where you could see the body sac, yolk sac which is getting formed. You could see the chorion. This chorion then என்ன ஆகும், which is getting the villi like formation, the finger like projections which will be like directly rooted in the endometrial wall. And you could see the amnion over here. You see this is the amnion, right? This is a body stalk over here. So growth of amnion first takes place. Amnion முடிச்ச பிறகு then what happens, like embryo with amnion, this cut open, then what happens, like germ layers will start differentiated like ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. ஒவ்வொரு புது ஆர்கன்ஸும் தனித்தனி division of labor பிரிச்சு கொடுத்துரும், சரிங்களா? Then the division of labor takes place. Then 21 days from the back view. Then the same 23 days if you take like the brain formation. See, so once the division of labor takes place, like ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm form ஆன பிறகு, stem cells ல இருந்து form ஆன பிறகு சிலது brain க்கு போகும், சிலது வந்து heart formation takes place. Now the heart formation, can you tell me at which month, like the first the heartbeat that you can record for mother, she's get like conceived, like எந்த monthல fetus ஓட heartbeat உங்களால கேட்க முடியும், எந்த monthல இருந்து first heart form ஆயிடும், but எந்த monthல you can clearly hear the heart sound, I mean heartbeat sound of the fetus. அதுலயே pulse rate ல உங்களுக்கு தெரிஞ்சிடும், but எந்த monthல இருந்து you can clearly identify. So yeah, 3 monthsல உங்களுக்கு மூணாவது மாசத்துல உங்களுக்கு என்ன தெரிஞ்சிடும்னா heartbeat ஓட குழந்தைக்குள்ள fetus ஓட heartbeat sound உங்களுக்கு கிளியரா கேட்க ஆரம்பிச்சிடும், சரியா? Then allantoic duct, then umbilical blood vessels, then amnion, the cut edge of the embryo, this will start developing. Okay, in this case formation of the germ layers. இப்போ germ layers எங்க இருந்து ஃபார்ம் ஆகும், உங்களுடைய அந்த inner cell massல இருந்து ஃபார்ம் ஆக போகுது. So a space called amniotic cavity filled with amniotic fluid appears between the ectoderm and the trophoblast. The amniotic fluid protects the cushions. இப்போ the amniotic fluid என்ன பண்ணுன்னா, அந்த friction இல்லாம இருக்குது, ஏன்னா the fetus going to spend there over 280 days அதுக்குள்ள தான் இருக்கணும், அதுக்கு friction movementக்கு எந்த விதமான பாதிப்பு இல்லாம இருக்கிறதுக்கு, friction அந்த cushion and lubrication நல்லா இருக்கிறதுக்கு, it needs a fluid inside. This fluid we call it as an amniotic fluid which protects and cushions the fetus again எந்த விதமான physical injury வராம, அம்மா மூவ் ஆகலாம், அம்மா என்ன ஒர்க் ஹெவி ஒர்க் பண்ணாலும் கூட at some point of time it protects actually the fetus from the physical injury and the temperature fluctuations. Which one is actually playing functions? The amniotic fluid is playing very important functions. Okay, fine. So here you could see the animal pole and you could see the vegetal pole, and you could see the dorsal and the ventral part. So this is the anterior part and the posterior part. Fate of the germ layers. At last, the fate of the germ layers we could see. If ectoderm in an organ, what are the hormones is going to get? This is a question you can get. You get one question. So what is the fate of the ectoderm, mesoderm, and what will be the fate of the endoderm actually? In this case, ectoderm. Here the epidermis of skin. So skin is getting formed from the ectoderm, where you could see the glands, hair follicles, then the mouth and the anus, which is from the ectoderm, cornea and lens of the eye, nervous system, sensory receptors in the epidermis, adrenal medulla, tooth enamel, and the actual pineal, epithelium of the pineal and the pituitary gland. These are all things, definitely one question will come from this part. This is the fate of the ectoderm. Mesoderm. Mesoderm then in form of a skeletal system, muscular system, excretory system, then circulatory and lymphatic system, and the reproductive system except the germ cells, adrenal cortex. Endoderm the liver, the pancreas, thymus, thyroid and parathyroid glands, urinary bladder, reproductive system, all these things which comes out of the, okay, just within like 3 minutes I just complete the class. Okay, fine. So these are the fate of the germ layers, and this I already told you, the ovum and the sperm interaction, how the ovum and sperm interacts with the spermiolysin. That part itself I clearly explained to you. So where the sperms will contact the eggs at the first, then acrosome reacts with the zona pellucidea, then the acrosome reacts with the perivitelline membrane, then plasma membrane of the sperms and the egg get fused, and sperm nucleus enters the egg, and cortical granules which eggs and membrane, which renders the vitelline layer independent to the sperm. This is actually sperm and ovum interaction. This we already discussed. We done it. And this is the placenta. Okay. As for the placenta, cross section of the placenta, if you take, right, you could see the villi, placental membrane, the umbilical cord. This is the umbilical cord, and then intervillous space. We could see the mother's blood vessels and the fetus blood vessels that is present. But mainly, the placenta is concerned, you need to understand the hormones. The endocrine glands produce hormones like HCG. What is expansion for HCG? Human chorionic gonadotropin. What is expansion for HPL? HPL. Then it produces estrogens and progestrogens. All these questions were the hormone which produced by the placenta. So it's a temporary endocrine gland, we can call it as. Okay, we done it. And this prepares for breast for the production of milk after birth and allows immunoglobulin. At 4th month, it is of 7.6 centimeter. At the end of the placenta increases in size to a 20 centimeter in diameter. So these things alone, and it plays a very important role in exchange of the gases, carbon dioxide blood. This placenta which plays a important role. HPL stands for human placenta lactogen. So at last, parturition, childbirth. Parturition is called as a childbirth. It is act of expelling the full term of the fetus from the mother's uterus at the end of the gestation. This because of the oxytocin, the hormone which produced, this is a birth hormone. This leads to the contraction of the uterine walls. Due to the contraction of the uterine walls, what happens? The baby, the onset of the labor which occurs, then flexion, the internal rotation. The internal rotation, internal rotation takes place. Then extension rotation of the head, and uterus immediately after the birth. If a head rotation proper nadaklana, then only we go for a C-section, cesarean panna solvanga. Cesarean பண்ணும்போது what happens? Head வர இடத்துல வந்து கால் வரும்போது என்ன நடக்கும்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, this we call it as a breech delivery. In the first part I told you like breech delivery அப்படினு சொல்லுவாங்க. Breech delivery is a condition which child head is down position, where what happens? The rotation which changes. குழந்தையோட பொசிஷன் மாறி இருக்கும்போது என்ன ஆகும்னா, ஃபர்ஸ்ட் ஹெட் வர இடத்துல வந்து கால் பொசிஷன் மாறும். அதனால என்ன பண்ணுவாங்க? They'll actually go for a C-section, cesarean பண்ணி எடுப்பாங்க actually. So, but in other cases, the normal delivery பார்க்கும்போது, if it is not a breech, then a normal legs வராம முதல்ல head வந்து வெளியில வரும். So this occurs by means of oxytocin hormone, the birth hormone. The last one, lactation and the parental care. We discussed about the mammary gland படிக்கும்போதே நம்ம lactation பத்தி நம்ம படிச்சோம் இல்லையா? And the parental care, gynecologists and obstetricians, like they prescribe mom to feed the baby for the first 6 months, because the fetus, like the neonate won't be having a proper immune system for 6 months. Amma kudukra and the breast milk, the colostrum and the parlor, and the first 6 months going to get all the nutrition. All right, guys. So by this, we are coming to the end of this particular chapter. that is human reproduction. So maybe in the next other sessions, like completely we have the question and answer, important questions and discussion session we'll have. So now we go for lunch and we'll just continue this break for the next 30 minutes of time. I mean, like the next given time, and after that we'll start with a new chapter, that is molecular basis of inheritance. By this we are completing to this chapter, that human reproduction. So just go through the textbooks, the NCERT book also, just go through with it. And if you have any doubts, you just don't feel hesitate to ask your doubts. So I try to clarify the doubts and get ready for the next chapter. We go with the molecular basis of inheritance. Thank you so much. Have good lunch and don't sleep. Okay, have a post lunch session. Stay awake. I'll meet you after lunch. Take care. Sir, lunch.